So welcome everyone. I'm Trevor Morrison. I'm the Dean of the Law School here, and it is a great pleasure to welcome everyone to the 14th Annual Hayek Lecture. Our lecturer this evening is Deirdre McCloskey, and I want to thank her for joining us. Richard will formally introduce her in a few minutes, but I do want to say on behalf of the entire law school how grateful we are to you for joining us. The Hayek Lecture, as you all know, I hope, is jointly sponsored by the Classical Liberal Institute and the NYU Journal of Law and Liberty. It was first held, the lecture was, in 2005, and the inaugural lecturer was Richard Epstein. And that was, in some ways, the beginning of this wonderful relationship, that is a relationship between NYU Law School and Richard Epstein. He joined our full-time faculty as the inaugural Tisch Professor of Law, and he co-directs the Classical Liberal Institute with Mario Rizzo of the NYU Economics Department. The Institute's scope is expansive and interdisciplinary. It's held together by a guiding commitment to examining the role of sound systems of property rights and contracts in advancing human welfare within a framework of limited government. And as I said, the Classical Liberal Institute is co-sponsoring this lecture together with the NYU Journal of Law and Liberty, which is the first student-edited law journal dedicated to the interdisciplinary exploration of classical liberal ideas. The journal and the institute are two very important parts of our intellectual community here at NYU, and we are very, very proud of them both, just as we are very, very proud of Richard Epstein, the indomitable, the indefatigable Richard Epstein, who has written on just about every legal topic and a bunch of others besides, has taught nearly the entire law school curriculum. We occasionally have to invent courses just so that there are a few that he hasn't yet taught, but he's constantly chasing that. It is impossible to imagine a greater source of energy, ideas, and collegiality in a law school community than Richard Epstein. We are thrilled that he is our colleague, and I turn things over to him. Richard.
It's really an exceptional honor to be here, and I want to thank Trevor for everything that he's done in the law school for me personally and for the CLI. I will say a couple of words about the institution. Tommy, are you sitting in the back there? We have been blessed with the support of many of our alums, including Tommy Tisch and so forth, and we started an operation in 2013, Mario, myself, and Jen Canos, and we were a bumbling, uncertain operation for the first year or so. And I'm happy to say that we've been able to grow with financial support from outside people and from being able to get committed scholars, mainly young, to come with us. We have a very clever program in which what we do is we have people who work with us here as fellows or organize a conference, and then what we do is we impress them into a legal service by making them program affiliates so that we can extend our work, which is otherwise done inside NYU Law School, to other places. We've been to Hong Kong, we've been, Lord knows, everywhere else. We bring people in off the boat from heaven knows where. Professor Kim wrote to us, and all of a sudden he is now a member of the Classical Liberal Institute because he taught in Seoul, for example. We are hopelessly opportunistic in the way in which we try to expand our relationships with faculty, with the students in the Federal Society, the Journal of Law and Liberty. Tuesday it was the Journal of Law and Business, and so forth. And we've run this program of giving lectures now since I gave the first one in 2005 on the relationship between intuition and protocol and the very different ways in which they sort of deal with knowledge, which sort of shows that we have a kind of an epistemological side to the kinds of things we've done. We've had an extremely distinguished list of people who have given subsequent talks. We tend now as a practice to sort of alternate between judges on the one hand and academics of one stripe on the other. And the worthy Miss McCloskey falls into the judge class. No, I got that wrong. She did something. I've known Deirdre for over 40 years. Mario had her as a teacher and will start to do this. And it's very difficult to figure out how it is you describe her massive, misguided, utterly perverse, thoroughly delightful intellectual energy, which manages to walk through a room and cast aside all sorts of presuppositions She is not somebody who is easily defined or characterized. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say she delights in internal contradiction, because when she speaks, she likes to keep everybody off balance. Now, if I were to introduce her and describe her intellectual proclivities and various kinds of attitudes in my own words, nobody would believe anything that I said. So what I did is I went to the University of Illinois at Chicago website, where she became an emerita professor in 2015, and got down this sort of, how do I describe it, self-reflection of everything that goes on. It is in small print, so I will take my glasses off, and I will read it. And remember, if you get upset about what she says, what you have to do is to realize that I didn't do it. And she says, I'm a literary, quantitative, postmodern, free market, progressive Episcopalian. That's just the starter. And if you start looking at it, how could you be both literary and quantitative? I'll leave it for that to describe. How could she be both postmodern and free market and a progressive Episcopalian? She's a Midwest woman from a Boston who was once a man, not conservative. I am a Christian libertarian. Well, I will let the rest of you figure out exactly what it means, but what I will say is, out of this, shall we say, grandiose self-definition comes a woman who has been one of the most productive scholars, I think, in the last 30 or 40 years. As I said earlier, people said, how would you assess her, shall we say, significance in the intellectual landscape? The first thing you would say is she does not know what the meaning of a departmental boundary is. She essentially lives her life dealing with intellectual curiosity and her own curiosities, both of which I think are to the good. She has continued to gain influence as she writes longer and more impressive books. I think it's fair to say that if you were to look around the world and try to find somebody at the intersection of history, institutions, theory, and practice on the so-called classical liberal side of the spectrum, you will not find anybody who has had more influence in these particular areas than Deirdre McCloskey. This is a tremendous kind of an achievement, because whereas most people, they kind of grow, do it, kind of fizzle out, this woman does not know the meaning of fizzle in terms of her own intellectual behavior. As to her particular personality traits, as a teacher, I'm going to turn it over to Mario, and then we will hear from her talking about how Hayekian liberalism has enriched us all by the royalties we get from writing books about Hayek. No, something else. Anyhow, Mario, come.
Okay. My remarks are kind of odd. So Laura and I were talking about when they should happen. And we settled on now. I was a student of Deirdre McCloskey in the winter quarter of 1972, when I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago. The course was British economic history. And I do remember that it was refreshing for me finally to apply economic analysis to something concrete. My cohort recently came from an experience in a class where we were treated to scores of elasticity formulas, elasticity of supply, elasticity of demand, cross-price elasticity, I don't remember, Marshall's rules, et cetera, et cetera. And indeed, I remember one class in which we only found out what the topic was at the end of the lecture. So it was really refreshing to see some clearly presented economic analysis of some real issues. In Deirdre's course, we learned that, as far as I can remember, that economic history can be subject to rigorous methods, and that was kind of new at the time. We also learned more concrete things like the alleged stagnation of late Victorian economy was not the case. We learned about the productivity of British and American steel and coal industries and the role of entrepreneurs in that context. I also remember an article, although I don't remember the contents, but I remember the name of an article that we read was called "From Damnation to Redemption, Judgments of a Late Victorian Entrepreneur." So, however, now I move to the weird part. The weird part is I have here my term paper from British economic history. Okay, dated 16 March 1972. Now, I reminded Deirdre that 1972 is for most of you, or many of you, as say 1928 was for us. So it may seem like a long time ago, but it doesn't seem that long ago to me. Okay, so I got this paper, and it's graded A-. Now, I think what happened here was that she put in the horizontal line, but forgot the vertical line that goes through it to make it an A+. So I would like her, later after her lecture, to regrade it as she originally intended, A+, and to sign it, and then maybe I'll send it to whoever was at the University of Chicago in charge of the transcripts. Yeah, so to change the transcript. Okay, thank you very much. All right, so now I have the pleasure of presenting Deirdre McCloskey on how Hayekian liberalism has enriched us all. Thank you.
I thank you all. This is a tremendous honor. And if I can see my text, I will, well, perhaps I'll just extemporize on it, not so much read it. I stutter, always have. And when I was about 11, I would go to sleep praying the next morning. I would not stutter, and I would be a girl. And I got at age 53, I got at least half of my prayers, which is okay for an Episcopalian. And if I was a Catholic or Jew, maybe more. Look, I would claim that liberals like Hayek, and of course I'm using the word in the correct sense, have missed, I think, the main significance of their preachments. We tend to think of the significance of the liberal order, and here I think, especially among lawyers, as a matter of the correct black letter laws for a free market and the constitutional provisions, whether written in the American way, unwritten in the British way, that underlies them. And I'm a little unhappy with that way of thinking, as widespread as it is in the law and economics community. Because I think that the laws, how can I say this, are empty, are without force, in the absence of ethical convictions, which are much more fundamental than what it says in the Internal Revenue Code. Although I've had some encounters with the Internal Revenue Code, and those words are really quite dangerous. They're very, very unpleasant. My argument, in short, is against my old friend Doug North, economic historian, who spoke of the rules of the game, which is a phrase that my economist colleagues love, because it's very easy to translate it into a constraint, a budget constraint. And this is how Samuelsonian economists think. They think of maximizing utility under constraints, and the constraint is this nice straight line which describes the price trade-off between one good and another. And law, custom, constitutions are in this view simply to be thrown into the constraint and proceed. There's no rhetoric. There's no discussion. There's no ongoing ascertaining of what the law means in this circumstance and that. It's a routine maximization of a kind that's quite foreign to the so-called Austrian approach to economics. Now, I should say, as a sort of a side piece of autobiography, I've been everything, as my self-description might suggest. I've been a Marxist, a Trotskyist, kind of soft-edged Trotskyist. I was never a Stalinist. I've been a Prince Kropotkin anarchist. I found his great book, Mutual Aid, when I was about 14 in the Wakefield, Massachusetts Carnegie Library, which is an irony that I love. And I've been a Keynesian, a la Krugman. I've been an economic engineer in graduate school, and gradually became a standard issue Chicago School economist. I've been an econometrician, blah, 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 blah. Finally, I've come to see the light, which is the Austrian approach, which emphasizes, and here's the point, human action, as they call it. I was speaking this afternoon with a colleague here about this, and he and I agreed that human action has a parallel in the Christian doctrine of free will. The standard neoclassic or Sandersonian or Keynesian view of the world is that we're all automatons, that we're just doing this mechanical maximization, and we don't have a creative spark. Now, all right, as the I hope brief reign of Donald Trump will show, ethics is a foundation of our legal and economic lives. And ethics is not the Baltimore Catechism and the nuns to enforce it. It's not another set of cut and dried constraints. It's the conversation of humankind. Now, this claim will, I know, sound to some of you is to be mushy and imminent. You wish, some of you, I'm sure not too many, you'll find out in the discussion how many there are, want to be Hobbesian and want to follow the master's claim that, quote, the bonds of words are too weak to bridle men's ambition, avarice, anger, and other passions without the fear of some coercive power. Or covenants, that's contracts, dears. Covenants without the sword are but words and of no strength to secure a man. Game theorists, my original field of economics, called words, they don't even say mere words, they go further. They call them cheap talk. Doesn't affect, my economist colleagues claim, the equilibrium, the outcome. I think that's false. Consider just a small piece of evidence that all of you have access to, your own motivations. Your own motivations as students and scholars, as legal theorists and practitioners. If the economic view, the housing view of lawyers were true, and that lawyers always closed the blinds and said, how do you want it? No one would consult the lawyers except the foolish other lawyers. So there is something more in your own lives than these constraints. Words matter, and words depend on ethics. I don't think the economy or the courts or your marriage would work for another half hour if it weren't for sweet words of persuasion, sweet words, shall we say, even go so far as to say of love, of human engagement of a sort that is very poorly represented by the objective rules of the game constraint that economists and many legal scholars have in mind. This afternoon I went in search of a computer mouse. Isn't that a marvelous thing that it's called a mouse? And I was told to go up to 6th Avenue and to walk until I found it. And I asked at various places, and I got courteous replies, which as a Chicago, I found very shocking. There was some sarcasm at my expense because I didn't know where I was going, but still. And I accomplished this simple economic task with the help of words. I've calculated that sweet talk, as one could call it, persuasion, not orders, but persuasion, accounts for 1/4 of labor income in a country like the United States. 1/4. The largest component of that is management and supervisors of various sorts. In a free society, you can't order people about and say, John, go do the following plea in court, or else I'll beat you with a stick. In the old days, that's what people did. That was how hierarchies were enforced. Precisely beating people. Servants in husbandry in England were routinely beaten. Wives were beaten. Slaves, of course. Children. I've always found it amusing that in my beloved second country, England, mostly in England, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals was founded in 1824. The Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children was not founded until 1884. So don't beat your horse, but do beat your children. But in a free society, changing people's behavior has to be a matter of sweet talk. Has to be a matter of changing their minds, as we say, that expressive metaphor. So what? I'm supposed to be, I'm cold, so it's very disgusting to get my handkerchief. Otherwise, I'll be actually dribbling from my nose. So what? I'm supposed to be an economist. So what else is new, Professor McCloskey? Well, as I argue in a book, in fact, in 3 books, here's one. The outcome of this way of thinking is that I've got an explanation of why we're rich, and you don't. I've got an explanation for not just the Industrial Revolution, as important as it was, but the follow-on, the Great Enrichment in the 19th century and in the 20th, and continuing. Despite what you might have heard in the newspaper and the news, inequality in the world is falling. Income per head in the world is increasing very fast. In 50 years, there will be no $1 a day or $2 a day people who will be left in the world. Infant mortality, a highly sensitive gauge of the ills that a society can have. The parents neglect their children because they're looking for jobs to survive. Children don't get vaccinated, blah, blah, blah. That has been falling like a stone. The birth rate has been falling worldwide. In Bangladesh, the birth rate was nearly at, what's the phrase they use? Replacement. 2.1 children per woman in such a society, and it's almost there. Once it was 5, 6 children. So the world is improving and has been for a long time, and I'm here to tell you why. One way that we economists do ever since Adam Smith was to talk about the accumulation of capital. That's a very prominent theme in the wealth of nations. But Adam Smith was thinking that perhaps the Highlands of Scotland could achieve an income equal to contemporary Holland. And that might have been a matter of building roads and of sending children to school, accumulating physical and human capital. But that's not why we're rich. So the whole program of so-called growth theory in economics is, shall we say, a waste of time. Let's not be coy about it. Piling brick on brick, even laundry on laundry, is not what makes us vastly richer. It makes us a little richer if we build a new law school auditorium, although this is doing very well. You might find some other use for it, and it might be a good thing to do. Fine, it's good. And if another person gets a law degree from NYU, they can only be to the good. How could that be harmful? Except to the enemies of justice. But to get as much as we got in the last 2 centuries, we need something spectacular, not just ground. How big? How much? 3,000% increases for the forest communities. Those are what the numbers that the economic historians say. It's an astonishing increase. If it were just a factor of 10,000%, that would be amazing. It's in fact probably higher than 3,000 because the goods and services that 3,000 measures are in fact improving in quality. The quality of law school instruction, I think, has improved in the last century or so. There's a little, Holmes wrote the Common Law, and it was a quite good book, as you recall. When he was a law professor. But certainly medicine has improved. If medicine hadn't improved, about half the people in this room would not be here. Certainly I would not be here. Artificial hips. I'm waiting for the artificial brain. So there's been a massive improvement in our lives. And it's very important, I think, for our politics and our legal thinking and our economic thinking to have that to, as John Dewey said, to feel that on our pulse. If you don't really feel how amazing the modern world is, you're going to think, oh, well, we can do better. Let's feel good. Let's bring the Security Exchange Commission to do more damage to financial markets. Let's get the FDA to prohibit more cures. Let's do more of that stuff because markets are perfect. And to that I say, in the face of 3,000% or 10,000% or even 1,000% in British tax, we should have such imperfections. So that's sort of the argument from the right, the conservative, the argument that rich people are good, they save a lot, capital accumulates, institutes are endowed. That's a good thing. That's how we became rich. I'm not against it, by the way. I'm not against investment. Come on, we have to have a building. Or I suppose we could go out in the park. It'd be like ancient Athens. From the left, the assertion is that it's exploitation of the modern. That's a little bit on its face, somewhat paradoxical. Because out of the exploitation of the working class comes an undeniable enrichment of the working class. You're better off, everyone in this room is better off than their great-great-grandmother or grandfather in material terms, maybe even in, so to speak, spiritual terms. So, or that the argument is often heard that Europe became rich because it stole from India, say, or from Africa. And it's very easy to show that that's not so, that it's quantitatively unlikely, that it doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's take the case of India for a moment. Half of the budget of the British Navy at the end of the 19th century was devoted to protecting the sea routes to India. What for, you might have stood up in Parliament and asked at the time. Because India was not profitable for the average British person. The average British person got to fight on the northwest frontier, or the Somme, or in Burma, to protect this empire, but did not get economic benefits from it. English people could have got their bananas for their breakfast table the same way that the Danes did, by trading with parts of the British Empire, without conquering anyone. So, and indeed, the argument has the same problem with the argument from the right has. Namely, it's based on capital accumulation. This is why I don't like the word capitalism. It's a scientific error embodied in the word. It says that capital is what makes the modern world and what makes us rich. And this is to confuse an intermediate cause, and to be sure necessary, with a primum mobile of first cause. And it's first cause that we see in science. It's not, it'd be like saying, you know, rainfall was necessary for the Industrial Revolution and the subsequent Great Enriched. So, I have a rainfall theory of how we got rich. get it. If there's no rainfall, we'd be very poor, except for the arrow of time is necessary condition, or the existence of a labor force, or the truth of the law of the excluded millers is the cause of the Industrial Revolution. No. What we want is something that's unusual, that apparently happened, or at least bore fruit, in the 18th century. What is it? I say in a word, it's liberalism. It's a change in how we talk about each other. It's a change socially, our social rhetoric. To some degree, never perfect, still under contestation, sometimes God. We started to treat each other as equals. It's equality of respect that's at the core of liberalism, and is at the core of Hayek's argumentation. The problem is that Hayek kept getting, in my opinion, making mistakes, I have to say, along the way. And he kept falling into the view that if you could just get the Constitution right, then you'd be on the safe ground. My friend, I didn't never know Hayek, but I knew Jim Buchanan. And Jim had the same view. You just get people to write down the correct Constitution all over the well, and in his lucid moments, which were quite frequent, I have to say, he would admit that it had to be ethically founded. It had to have to do with our conversation and talk about each other. Adam Smith expressed it, this core idea, as every time when I was in Russia, arguing with liberalism, I mentioned Smith and caused myself the other way. He said, what we need is the obvious and simple system of natural liberty. In almost the same place he says, we need the liberal plan of equality, liberty, and justice. And that's what changed. What we meant by equality is not French-style equality, not Vegas and Rousseau cutting down the tall poppies, flattening the distribution of income afterwards, but equality, but social equality, equality of respect. Adam Smith was a egalitarian, strongly so. And then he said liberty, by which he meant economic liberty. The ability to open a hair weaving salon without going through hundreds of hours of pointless education to get a license that you need in Chicago. The ability to make a bargain for employment, he was particularly incensed by interventions in the ability to move in the access and settlement, to move to places where they thought they could find employment, and then equal justice and law. So, how do I do this? I keep saying I'm an economist. Come on, show you're an economist. Well, here's how you do it. The claim is, and this is a deeply empirical claim, I've tested it in 700 pages here, and there are two other volumes, only 500 pages each. That's a short course. I was going to, at one point I was going to do 6 volumes. And I on 4. And then I said, it was not the University of Chicago Press that said it, I said, there can only be 3, because though a trilogy might be considered somewhat self-indulgent, a tetralogy is an abomination. It's stone for tetralogy. So I didn't want to be stoned. In that sense. We're, after all, in the village here. Come on. So the empirical claim here, which is not hard to winkle out of the contrast between the way Shakespeare talked about middle class, say, and the way Jane Austen talked about and can be confronted with the evidence of the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century in various ways. Here's the claim. That the growth of liberalism, the development of this idea, let me quote the wonderful Richard Rumbold, hung in 85, who said famously, what did he say famously? I think there is no man, there it is. I am sure there is no man, this is speaking from the, it's about to be on, you're allowed in English law to have speech. Sure, I think. Talk about a law. I am sure there was no man born marked with God above another. 1688. For none comes into the world with a saddle on his back, neither any booted and spurred. Right? I found the other day that Thomas Jefferson, the driver of slaves, appropriated that without telling who wrote it, which I find kind of annoying, adds to my problems with Tom. The observable idea, the scientific idea here, is that people are inspirited when they're treated with equality. You can test this, you'll find out what's true. Do people love hierarchy and perform much better in hierarchical circumstances where you're the milkmaid forever and that's who you are and shut up? Or do they perform better when your husband graciously allows you to have a job in a cotton mill? And the answer, I think, is the latter. That when you have agency, as we say, that's the kind of word these days, we borrow, of course, from the law. When you have agency, you work hard. It's the old sort of false liberal claim about slavery. The slaves always are worse workers than free people. That's just not true. Depends how hard it is. But it is true that ordinary people were inspirited this way. They were brought to take charge of their own lives, the way the hierarchies had implemented. One example, the Protestant Reformation was not so much as Max Weber claimed in 1905 about the doctrine of salvation. Most theologians and students of church history have said he's wrong about that. No, it was about church governance. It's about who is in charge of your spiritual life. The extreme example are the Quakers, in which even women were allowed and encouraged to speak at the meeting, and in which there was no pastor. There was no hierarchy, and still, to this day, there is none. So there you have it. We became rich to this fantastic degree because we were inspirited to try things out, to have a go. As the Australians say, fair go. To have a go to invent the modern university in 1810, the University of Berlin, to invent the railway, to invent and I'll end on this, containerization. Containerization is just a beautiful example of my theme here. That it's individual entrepreneurship, not so much the structured laws, which are the same in most civilized communities, or they're not civilized communities, and have been true forever. It's what Doug North and Barry Lancaster long ago claimed, that the English law of property, and I suppose contract they also meant, was significantly improved in 1689. No, Barry, you're wrong. It was significantly improved before the time of Edward I. English law, for that matter, Roman law, was not defective in talking about property and contract. So there's no big legal revolution that leads to. I once taught the Roy, so I know. Once again, I'm a convert. There's no big legal revolution that causes the Industrial Revolution and this marvelous great enrichment. It's a change in ethics, a change in attitude, a change in how we speak about each other. And so, let's take the case of containerization. In 1956, a not particularly prosperous owner of a trucking firm in North Carolina thought to himself one day, I think of the scarecrow and the Wizard of Oz, the hypotenuse, the square of the hypotenuse, blah, blah, blah. He thought himself one day that wouldn't it be nice if we could get standardized boxes and put them on ships and send stuff that way. That way stuff wouldn't be stolen in the ports. That way it could be handled en masse, and each guy carry a bag off the ship. It's obvious. It involved no science. It involved only the invention of inexpensive steel, which Henry Bessemer invented in 1854 when a gust of wind came through his iron foundry and blew through what we call it tons of pig iron, which then went boom, and the carbon came off of it, and it became steel. So it's that context of freedom and willingness to have a go that made containerization, which has caused the price of ocean and indeed rail and truck shipping to fall through the floor. So that's my claim here. It's not capital, it's not exploitation. It's in ourselves that we are not underlings. It's in our conversation about ourselves. It's in our rhetoric, our talk, our ethics. One could say our ideology. And the great change in ideology was what this institute is about: liberalism. Freedom, understanding that in Latin, it comes from the word Latin, from the Latin, which means a free person, free man, or free woman. And a society of free people is what liberalism, in its most fundamental sense, advocates. And what's amazing about it is that it works. It works for material gain. And as I would suggest and say at some length in this marvelous book, which is available by way in spoken book. Spoken book. You can hear it on your commute from the far distant Queens. It's not only in material things, but most spectacularly in material things. China and India, in their economy, became much more liberal and grew at still continue to grow at extraordinary rates. So that's my hypothesis. Thank you.
Well, I think we're going to say we're not going to allow her to escape unscathed.
No, I shouldn't think so.
And that we're going to therefore take some questions. Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking.
Yes.
Now, where you going, Gal? You want to sit?
I'm going to just pull this up here.
That's good. I'll sit on it.
No, I'll be the judge, you see.
She'll be the judge. You see, she does believe in a centralized judicial system. Yeah. May it please the court. So anyhow, I mean, does anybody want to ask the first question? I see several people doing. I'll start in the back. Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on the relationship between...
Oh, Philip!
Hello, good to see you. Have you any thoughts on the relationship between economic egalitarianism and political egalitarianism? You ended mentioning China.
Yeah.
What's the fate of economic equality and freedom in a society that is not so politically?
Well, I don't think it can be sustained over a very long run. I think liberty is unified. There's a book edited by Gary Kasparov, which is essays on liberty. In the face of the rise of communism, and I didn't think very exciting to say that, except in my own say. I say that liberty is liberty. And a great Soviet writer, a Soviet writer, who's described as one of the few communists who truly escaped entirely from communism, said that what ordinary people want by way of freedom is the freedom to open that hairdresser's salon. We, academics, intellectuals, clerics, we want freedom to talk. That's what we do. But I think freedom is freedom. And I don't want to go as far as my old friend and colleague Freeman saying one implies the other, but I don't see why they wouldn't. I don't see why there wouldn't be some connection between a free price. Indeed, the free press of the 19th century is an excellent example of that. Because when steam printing became possible, instead of having print runs of 4,000, they had print runs of 400,000 in newspapers. Then newspapers could support themselves in advertising, instead of supporting themselves by being the newspaper of X party. So they became independent of the other term. I don't want to on about this, because frankly, I don't know.
You don't know. Question and then question. Mike, come to the mic. Father, if you want to line up on Mike,
yeah.
It might solve the problem of social order by leaving in the center.
Thank you very much.
That is exactly right. So we will now have a debate on the importance of
So Deirdre, this question might take us a little bit far afield, but you're talking about liberalism as sort of what enriched us. In circles that I run in, with people who often are outside the economics profession and conservative circles, there's beginning to be a lot of questioning of liberalism, why liberalism failed. So I wonder if you could comment both about the way in which people today, are we having the same kind of talk about liberalism that we had, say, in the 1800s that brought about the Great Enrichment? And also, how would you respond to people who are criticizing sort of the liberal project as unsustainable or inherently contradictory? So,
And so this, the conservatives in the 19th century didn't have the nerve to talk this way, but now people do. And I find it unpersuasive, to put it mildly. Look, invention is things that people do. Let's get kind of elementary about it. A new idea, whether academic or educational or, I don't know, cooking or whatever, comes from folks. And it's not at all obvious that a select group of college graduates in Washington can second-guess things. There's this terrible book by, what's her name? I can't remember her first name, but Mazzucato, which is part of this anti-liberal reaction, where she talks about the entrepreneurial state, by which she means the government. Well, I don't think so. 95% of it is folks opening a hairdressing salon.
thank you, Professor McCloskey. I've been impressed with your ideas since I first heard them 6
Good,
years ago.
good. I am obviously a man of taste.
and equally so tonight. But I was wondering what you might say to the idea that we in the West have lost a certain faith in liberalism.
Absolutely.
And if this really does drive output and growth, does even the false belief, lack of spirit, as you might put it, immunity to the sweet words, could that perhaps lead to declining growth rates in the future?
It has. And in fact, it's like my opinions on infant baptism. You ask me if I believe in infant baptism. Believe in it, I've seen it. And all right, I've seen that a lack of faith in this causes slow growth. East Germany, Venezuela, to take a current case. And that's why I write the books. I've got a new book, really a collection of old stuff, so that's, don't ever publish only once. That's my advice to the young scholars here. A book of essays that Yale is going to publish in the fullness of time, called How to Be a Humane Libertarian, Essays in a New Liberalism. And I wouldn't bother if I didn't think I could maybe change some minds and get a few more people on what I regard as the correct and ethical side, which is the side of not pushing people around. Now, in an audience of lawyers, I expect a lot of you think, well, no, wait a second, come on, laws are about pushing people around. Let's have some, that's right, let's have some more of that law. And I say, well, actually there was a statement by a marvelously clever economist a long time ago. He said, look, economics is the science of conserving on love, because love by itself is not going to run an economy. You thought it was a good thing, I do too. But you'd better also have self-interest involved. I feel the same way about legal interventions in the economy. Yeah, you need them, but you'd better economize on them.
Thank you. Doctor, thank you again.
I'm not a
see you speak.
I'm not a doctor. I have
Professor.
a PhD, but a long time ago, I learned that if you called yourself Dr. McCloskey, you would get upgraded on an airplane. And so I had my travel agent do it once, and I tell you, it was terrifying. The whole flight, I was afraid someone was going to have a heart attack. And I would have to say, well, if your philosophy is sick. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, dear.
You lost me for a second.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No. First of all, you left out the most important part of your book sales pitch.
What's that?
How much on Amazon?
Cheap. Less than you might think.
Sounds
A
good.
bargain. Hurry. Supplies are limited. New. Have I got it more or less? Good.
Now, I'm curious how you apply your theory, your understanding to the Chinese example, Song China,
Yeah.
which came quite close to what the West managed to achieve, but not exactly, and Tokugawa Japan, which
Exactly.
has been argued to have a lot of the preceding elements of English industrialization.
But you see, that's why I think the preceding elements that people have focused on, the rule of law, peace. I mean, Tokugawa Japan was at peace for 2.5 centuries. In one way, by taking the gun away from everyone, taking wheeled vehicles away from people. But in the Chinese case, it's the same problem. Chinese enforcement of law was superior to that in the West through most of its history. It's not true that it was arbitrary. It was not. It wasn't perfect justice. I mean, but which lawyer in this room will claim that the American system is perfectly just? So that's why it's terribly important to keep the other cases in mind and not just drill down on England. You know, do England back to the Magna Carta or something. No. You have to keep in mind that this excellently equipped economy called the Chinese economy in 1492, if you knew there was going to be a great enrichment, you would have bet the farm on China. Not on Europe. Are you nuts? This quarrelsome bunch of jerks there whose science wasn't good, whose technology was terrible, whose ships were pathetic by comparison with junks. So yeah. We've got to do China. We can't just rely on look, we can't confuse necessary conditions with historically important conditions. It's necessary to have, ships and sealing wax and so forth, but that doesn't mean that it's a good historical explanation of what happened. Yeah.
Somewhat similar question.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask about kind of the Roman and Greek examples.
Go ahead.
You had situations in history.
Same answer, really, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess he covered the ground already.
Well, no, but if you can ask it in a sharp way that puts me off my game, that'd be even better.
Yeah, a little bit of pressure. It seems to me, in the English example, certainly liberalism coexisted with slavery, it coexisted with...
It did. Okay.
Somewhat.
I'll get into that in a minute.
It coexisted with certainly the persistence of some class hierarchy.
That's for sure.
And in the Roman example and in the Greek example, you had, for at least brief pockets of time, some of the same traits,
That's
one could
right.
say. Certainly still slavery in the Roman Republic example, maybe not a long period of peace, but despite the hiccups of some technological advancement, there were some scholars believe they had the kind of beginnings of what could have become some kind of steam-powered device, but it didn't seem to take off.
They had it, but it didn't take off. They had an economy in which women were excluded. Let's start with that. In which physical work was dishonorable, because it was the work of women and slaves, in which the Honorable cursus honoris for a Roman free man was being a rhetorician, being a lawyer, in fact, and rising to the chief positions in the state. And the same was true of China, that the way you got to be a public official in China was to be very good at Chinese poetry, at reading it and remembering it and writing it. And that's okay. That's like a liberal arts education. I don't regard it as silly. In fact, I regard it as good. But it doesn't result in the invention of containerization. And I think one of the problems that both China and Japan had is that they were rather centralized. Now, I don't want to exaggerate this, and it's true of the Roman world too, but again, easily exaggerated. All decisions weren't made at Rome. It was rather decentralized in actual administration, because they didn't have the state capacity, as we now call it, to order things from Rome in a central planning way. But things could be stopped very easily from Rome. And they certainly could from the Chinese court. So I think it just makes my case. Of course, I was about to say the same thing, dear. I was about to confess that everything makes my case because it's true. Truth is unified.
Thanks.
Why don't we have 4 more questions, and I think we should take them all.
Okay, let's do it.
And if there's one desperate other individual who would like to get on the queue, do so quickly or forever hold it.
That's right.
Thanks for an interesting talk. What I was left a bit puzzled about is like how dependent is liberalism on the underlying political legal sphere. At some point, you criticized Buchanan a little bit for being like a political constructivist.
Yes.
Things that each action is dependent on the underlying rules.
Yeah.
And so you pointed us at the fact that liberalism is part of a culture and it's part
Yes.
of how I see you and how you
Yep,
see me.
exactly.
But on the other hand, you did worry a little bit if you and me want to start a hairdressing office.
Yeah.
And we need 3 licenses and we need to study 5 years and stuff, you might not do it in the end, right?
Yeah, that's
so
true.
rules do have an effect.
Oh, they have
So
an
at some
effect,
point I thought,
usually a bad one.
given the fact that we live in a world where not only the left but also the right with protectionist measures and whatnot is
Yeah.
threatening the rule of law and economic liberty,
Yeah.
we should relax the worry that this will threaten liberalism because it's like entrenched in our culture and how we treat each other. On the other hand, you did raise a couple of elements that point at the relevance of the legal rules. So my question was a little bit, how dependent is liberalism on these legal rules? Not a little bit, a lot, as much as Buchanan would say, probably less. That's
Well,
the sort of tension I felt.
My point about the legal rules is that they're ancient,
Okay.
that it's not a change, that
Well, the good ones are ancient, but other ones change the whole time, right?
I know they do, and and then there's an idea. I'm making a case. I did not make it explicitly this evening, but I'm making a case that there's a certain amount of autonomy in the realm of ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can see it in art, you can see it in poetry, you can see it in film and novels and painting and so forth. It's not all, from 1890 on, most of us were Marxist in one way or another, even if we were conservative. We thought that the superstructure is determined by the relations of production. That's why I liked Marxism so much when I was a kid, because it was so simple. History of all hitherto societies, the history of class struggle, that's all you need to know. You're all set. So that's where, I don't know the answer to your question. Here's what you could imagine. Suppose Britain had sunk beneath the waves, or to be more plausible, suppose the Spanish Armada had succeeded. Would there have been liberalism? And if your answer is no, Voltaire wasn't enough, French liberalism which is very dependent actually on English, specifically English institutions, would not have arisen, then maybe you can make the case that English institutions were, and laws, were peculiarly important to the history of liberalism. I would have to be a much more profound student of that history to be even to start to adequately answer you. Here's one fact. In the 1740s, English judges stopped enforcing guild rules. Interesting. They just stopped saying, well, you have to join a guild, and we're not going to allow you to join a guild if you come to town. No, they said, no, you're allowed to work as a carpenter even though you're not a member of the Carpenters Guild. You can see that would lead to an attitude of free markets and let's all be carpenters and so forth. So I'm too simple-minded to answer your question with any sophistication.
Hi, thank you as well. My question to you is how much your thesis works in the reverse. So we've talked about a framework of rules that is the foundation basically for the prosperity we enjoy right now.
Yeah, but I didn't say that. I said the opposite of that.
Okay, so my question was going to be how much does economic prosperity lead to the framework in the other sense? So we've been pretty bad heirs to that foundation of our prosperity.
Yeah, but I don't think our prosperity depends on, how can I say this in a polite way, on legal rules. It depends on ethics.
Yeah, well.
It depends on attitudes. Yeah. It depends on ideologies, much more. I mean, look, the obvious example is the Soviet Constitution, which you ought to read. It's really a beautiful document.
I have.
Don't read it. No, you shouldn't. But you see what I mean. Ask your question a little bit again.
Does the prosperity lead to the ethical framework as well as
the
ethical
not,
framework leads to
and that's the danger. It may go the other way. It may make people casual about these liberalities, these ideologies, and say, oh, well, we don't need to worry about that.
That's actually a really great lead into my question. I was wondering if you think that your vision of sort of social equality liberalism is compatible with what is now maybe 3-4 decades of government by a largely heritable ruling class, but that believes itself to be completely meritocratic, and as a result, better.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about it on a number of grounds. I think we should have affirmative action for poor people. I think we should have not a minimum wage, but a minimum income for poor people. I think we should be really working on this hard, and I don't think we are. I've lived and taught in South Africa, and ik hou van South Africa. I love South Africa, but its economic policies are just maddening. They have a high minimum wage which the trade unions want, which leaves millions unemployed. And they have an educational system that doesn't work very well, and instead of every young Afrikaner South African wanting to go be a school teacher in the provinces to raise up his country, they go into finance. So I'm concerned about that. Yes, dear.
I'm curious. I suppose I should start off by thanking you for coming here.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm curious how you would respond to those that would suggest, while there has been a great enrichment, the benefits have been more than offset by attendant damage to the environment or rising levels of corruption in developing nations.
I'd ask you to read my books, especially buy them. Because I do take seriously, I have a kind of adversarial view of scholarship, and
it irritates some people. I have an adversarial view of science. So I'm always quarreling with people. I don't know anyone else in this room who does that. Yeah, neither do you. And so, but I try to take seriously my friends on the left and right, and I have lots of friends like that. And they'll say things like that. They'll say, oh, but the environmental disaster, it's too much. Or they'll talk about inequality. And I have a long review of Piketty's book where it's an honorable enterprise. He's a serious scholar. He's not that good an economist, but he's a serious scholar. And this is a noble and brave work, and wrong right down to the bottom. So short answer is no. Last question. Pithy, short and pithy response. Oh, well, we got to have booze and
I'm not
food.
going to hold anyone back from that. So I listened to an interview with Hayek where he actually mentioned the universal basic income and how he sees a future where that's possible.
We were talking about that in Chicago in the early 70s.
And so one of the things that I'm always kind of thinking about and trying to reconcile is how do you reconcile a universal basic income with a legal system where people can essentially vote themselves that money?
Yeah, well, that's the deepest problem of modern politics. I'm a Democrat, small d. But I do rather agree with my hero, H.L. Mencken, who said, democracy is the theory that ordinary people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. And so that's since working class voting, which came in the German Empire, in Prussia, not the German Empire, in 1867, and in the same year in Britain, earlier in the United States, let's not get into that, but it's a problem because people want to vote them. Let's take a case in point, Argentina. Argentina has never gotten over Juan Perón or Evita for that matter. And they think that a really neat way of making me better off is to take from you. It's Huey Long's theory. It's Robin Hood's theory. It's King John's theory. It's the theory of zero sum. Negative sum. We're a positive sum.
Nick is now going to say some final words
Good.
of thanks.
I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Law and Liberty. We've just had the Protestant Episcopalian professor tell us about the bourgeois morality and the ways to enrich the world. Well, now you have the Catholic student here to